Today we'll be looking at GDP, which is a very common topic in economics and business as well. So these are some contents we'll be looking over, such as what GDP is, calculating it, knowing the distinct forms of GDP, limitations, what is included in GDP, and looking at examples more closely. So some skills to develop are here listed, which is like problem solving and adapting and being able to analyze data and numbers, which we need to calculate it later on. So GDP is one of the best measures of economic health. It accounts for things that are produced within our domestic borders, whether they are produced by Canadians or foreigners living here. The purpose is to measure economic activity to see how well the economy is doing. And it's important because it gives information about the size of the economy and how an economy is performing. The growth rate of real GDP is often used with governments and higher officials to navigate on what resources should be implemented in the country. So all countries have ranging GDPs depending on their population and resources as well as the standards of living. So a higher population does not always mean a country is going to have a higher economy. The GDP per capita gives a more accurate representation on how well countries are doing, as it takes population into consideration. So these three countries have distinct population. So for an example, China does not have a relatively high GDP, even though it has one of the highest populations in the world. Yet Canada has a growing economy despite its population of around 38 million. France has a larger population than Canada, but it has a lower GDP than Canada. So these are things to consider while comparing GDP per capita amongst countries. So there are two approaches to calculating GDP. There's the income approach and the expenditure approach. The most common way is to use the expenditure approach, which adds up the goods and services that are being produced. And the income approach uses like things that are earned from the production of goods and services, such as wages, rents, interest, etc. So to calculate this, there are three different ways to get, or at least get some numerical value relating to GDP. First, there's the GDP per capita, which is the GDP of the country divided by the population of the country. Next, we have the income approach to get GDP, which adds interest, wages and salaries, profit and rent. And then we have the expenditure approach, which adds investment, consumer spending, goods, net exports, which actually have exports minus imports. And now we'll be looking at the different types of GDP. So one is called nominal GDP and one is called real GDP. Nominal GDP presents dollar value of a good or service to answer what the value is at a specific time. Real GDP presents quantities of goods or services sold to answer what is the level of increase or decrease in the production if price does not change. So the main difference is that nominal GDP answers the question, what is the value of goods and services produced in a specific time, whereas real GDP answers the question, what is the level of increase or decrease in production by quantity if the prices did not change. So nominal GDP is output using current prices, whereas real GDP measures output using constant prices. Now we have something called GNP, which is similar but different from GDP, and it's the total market value of all goods and services produced by a nation's economy, and gross domestic product is the value of the finished domestic goods and services produced within a nation's borders. So it's very different from GNP. So GNP is a value of all finished goods and services owned by a country's citizens, whether or not those goods are produced in that country, whereas GDP is whoever is living in the country, whether it might be a foreigner or not. So there are some limitations in GDP, such as non-market transactions, and though GDP can provide us with significant information, there's only a limited amount to what it can include. So GDP does not describe what is being produced, it does not describe income distribution, it does not incorporate any measures of welfare, like happiness, it does not include product quality, composition of output, so where the government is focusing on with the money, income distribution, how equal or unequal the payment is among citizens, leisure or level of entertainment, safety and security level of employees, unpaid childcare, DIY work, and underground economies, such as the black market or illegal industries. So now we'll be putting these pieces of information into practice. So what is included or excluded in GDP, and what can actually be part of that GDP is part of these questions. So a monthly scholarship check received by a college student from the government. So it says that it was received by a college student, so this will be part of the government spending. Now the second, a mechanic fixing his own car without pay on the weekend. So that is obviously a non-market transaction. There is no money, so obviously it's not going to be included in the GDP. Then we have a $20,000 new Toyota car made in Japan. So if you are living in Canada, then this will be actually brought by Japan, so that will include net exports, and you are paying the $20,000, so that will be included as a consumption part. Now more examples, a bakery spends $50,000 on a new oven investment. So this will be included because it explicitly says it's an investment and the bakery is actually spending that money. Second example, a social security check received by a retired person. So this is actually not included in GDP because the money is going from one place to another. There's no information on whether that person spends it or not, or what they're going to spend it on. It just says it's received, so there is nothing to account for, so it's not included in GDP. Next, we have this problem that we can use with calculation. So we have a table 1. We can calculate the GDP using expenditure approach. So the table contains more data than necessary. The information is not all we need, but there are some parts that we need, such as the consumption, the government spending, investment, and the exports minus imports. So in this case, the C is represented by household consumption, which is $304. The G refers to government spending, which is $156. I is gross private investment, which is $124. And the net exports, which is in the table, is shown to be $18. So therefore, GDP using the expenditure approach is 304 plus 156 plus 124 plus 18, and that should equal to $602. So just think about how GDP can impact your everyday life, what you're doing to contribute to GDP, whether you're reselling something, so that is already sold, which will not count for GDP, or you're actually buying something for the first time, so that will count for GDP, comparing how well or unwell economies are doing based on the GDP per capita, which we talked about, and most importantly, understanding the terms, the difference between nominal and real GDP. That is the key thing, and knowing the difference between GNP and GDP. Thank you. I hope you learned something, and just make sure to at least get one thing from this video that you will actually be applying today or tomorrow.